In the heart of a sunlit African village, where the air smelled of roasted yam and fresh rain on red soil, there lived a woman named Naima. She was not rich, nor did she seek to be. Her joy was found in the rhythm of life, in the hum of morning songs, in the soft laughter shared between her and her husband, Olu, as they worked the fields side by side. Together they had built a small home of mud and thatch near the palm grove, where the river could be heard whispering in the distance. Naima was known across the village as the woman of peace. When neighbors quarreled, she was the voice of calm. When storms broke roofs and flooded fields, she was the first to offer food or shelter. Her spirit was steady, like the roots of an old tree. And for many seasons her husband loved her for it, or so she thought. But peace, as the elders say, can sometimes bore restless hearts. Olu had begun to grow distant. His eyes wandered beyond the fields, beyond the laughter they once shared. He envied the young men who wore fine wrappers, who spoke of the city and its riches. And then came Adana, the chief's daughter, radiant, adorned in beads and silk, her beauty loud as thunder. She was everything Naima was not: bold, loud, adorned in gold, and unashamed of her ambition. Adana's father was a man of power, and Olu began spending more time near the chief's compound under the guise of helping with trade. Naima, unaware of the storm brewing, continued her quiet routines, cooking, cleaning, praying, and waiting for her husband's laughter to return. But one evening, as the sky burned orange and the crickets began their song, she noticed it: the way his voice softened when Adana's name was mentioned, the way he looked through her, as if searching for something she could no longer give. That night, Naima prepared his favorite meal, pounded yam with spicy okra soup, and waited for him by the fire. When he arrived, she smiled, hoping to bridge the silence. But Olu did not sit. He stood at the door, his shadow long and heavy. "Olu," she said softly, "your food is ready. You've hardly eaten all day." He didn't move. "I'm not hungry," he said flatly. Her brow furrowed. "You've been distant. Tell me, have I done something wrong?" He looked at her, his eyes dark and tired. "You've done nothing wrong, Naima," he said. "But I am tired of this life. I want more than this, more than a small hut and empty hands." Her voice trembled. "And I am not enough for that more you seek?" He sighed, glancing away. "You are peace, Naima. But peace doesn't fill a man's belly. I need something greater, something brighter." She felt her heart break slowly, like pottery cracking under fire. "Then go if you must," she whispered. "But remember, peace may not fill your belly, yet it feeds the soul." He said nothing more. He took his small sack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked into the night without looking back. The sound of his footsteps faded, replaced by the steady hum of crickets and the soft crackle of the dying fire. Naima sat there until dawn, her eyes empty, her hands clasped on her lap. The food turned cold, untouched. Outside, the first light of morning crept into the hut, painting everything gold, but to Naima, it felt like ashes. Word spread quickly through the village. Some pitied her, that poor woman who gave her heart to a man without a soul. Others mocked her. He left because she had no spark. Men like color, not calm. Naima heard every whisper, but she said nothing. In the days that followed, she continued her chores as if nothing had changed. She fetched water, swept the compound, greeted the neighbors. But when night came, she lay awake listening to the distant laughter from the chief's house, the sound of her husband's voice mingling with Adana's. And though her eyes stayed dry, her heart wept quietly. The camera would linger on her face, still yet full of emotion, her eyes shimmering under the glow of the hearth. The room would be dim, save for the orange flicker of the firelight on her skin. Dust motes would dance in the beam of dawn as the sun entered her hut, a new day rising on a woman left alone. Somewhere outside, a palm branch swayed gently in the wind, whispering the truth the world had yet to see, that sometimes when peace is broken, strength is born. The days that followed were long and hollow, each one stretching into the next like a song without an ending. Naima moved through them quietly, the same woman, yet not the same at all. She woke before dawn, swept the floor, fetched water, and cooked as though her husband would return. But his mat remained untouched, his laughter gone from the air like smoke after rain. The village no longer looked at her with warmth. Pity had turned to curiosity, then to gossip. "She must have done something," one woman whispered at the market. "No man leaves peace for chaos unless peace hides a flaw." Another laughed. "Maybe the chief's daughter bewitched him. That one's beauty could melt a man's sense." Naima walked past them without turning her head. Her mother had once told her, "When the world's mouth opens against you, close your heart, not your ears." But even so, the whispers clung to her like dust. When news broke that Olu had married Adana, the world seemed to tilt. The marriage was a grand affair, drums, dancers, bright fabrics that glimmered under the sun. Even the chief himself blessed their union. And Naima, the woman who had shared Olu's struggles, who had fed him when he was hungry, who had worked beside him through hardship, was not even mentioned. 2 days after the wedding, Olu returned, not to reconcile but to claim the final piece of his past. He arrived with Adana at his side, her wrists covered in golden bangles, her perfume thick in the air. Naima was washing cassava by the river when she saw them approach. Her hands froze mid-motion. Olu did not meet her eyes. He said flatly, "This land, it was in my name. My new wife and I will need it now. We're building a new home here." Naima looked up slowly, her voice steady. "This was our home." Adana smiled, a cold, bright smile. "Was. Everything changes, dear Naima. You can always start over. Women like you always do." Naima said nothing. She rose from the water, her wrapper soaked and clinging to her legs. Without a word, she walked past them, leaving behind the calabash she had been using. By nightfall, she packed her few belongings, a cooking pot, a small mat, a bundle of clothes, and stepped out of the hut she had once shared with love. She did not cry when she closed the door. But when she reached the end of the path, she turned once to look back. Smoke rose gently from the roof, and inside she could hear laughter, Adana's, high and triumphant. The road stretched before her, empty and hot under the fading light. She walked barefoot, dust rising with each step. The sun burned her shoulders, but she did not stop. Every few miles she rested under a tree, sipped from her small gourd of water and continued. By the second day her feet were blistered. Her lips cracked. Yet she kept moving. The thought of her mother's village, her only refuge, pulled her forward. When she finally reached the compound, she collapsed near the entrance. Her mother, old and frail, ran to her side, crying her name. "Naima, my child. What has happened?" Naima tried to speak, but the words came out as sobs. Her mother held her close, rocking her gently like a child. But their reunion did not bring peace. Her uncle, the head of the family, came forward later that evening, his tone cold and heavy. "You left your husband's house," he said. "You have brought shame upon this family. A woman's strength is her patience, not her pride." Naima raised her eyes to him, weary but defiant. A woman's patience should not be her prison. Her mother lowered her gaze, torn between pride and fear. "Let her stay," she pleaded softly. "The world has already punished her enough." And so Naima stayed, though not as a daughter welcomed home, but as a burden tolerated. She slept in a small corner of her mother's hut and rose with the first light to work in the fields. The soil was hard, the pay was little, and the sun showed no mercy. Her hands grew calloused. Her back ached. But with each day that passed, her heart grew stronger. The same heart that had once been broken began to mend itself, not with love but with purpose. At night, she would sit outside, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the river. The water seemed to whisper to her the way a friend might, "You still breathe. You still rise." One night, as the wind rustled through the tall grass, Naima whispered to herself, "If I cannot be loved, then let me at least be strong." And with that vow, something inside her shifted, small but powerful. It was not hope yet, not forgiveness, but it was the first spark of something new, survival. The first months in her mother's village passed like slow-moving shadows. Naima barely spoke. She worked from dawn till dusk in the cassava fields, her feet cracked from the hard ground, her palms torn from pulling stubborn roots. Every evening she came home coated in dust and silence. Her mother watched her daughter's quiet suffering with heavy eyes. She had seen women die from heartbreak before, and feared her Naima might fade the same way. One afternoon, while working near the river, Naima's hoe struck something buried in the soil, a small, carved wooden figure worn smooth by time. She lifted it carefully. It was a woman kneeling, her face turned toward the sky, hands open as if offering something unseen. There were no golds or jewels, but it felt sacred, alive in her palm. An elder woman working nearby noticed. "Ah," she said softly, "you found the spirit of return. They say she appears only to those who have lost everything. Keep her close, child. The river knows how to give back what the world steals." Naima smiled faintly for the first time in months. That night, under the pale moon, she placed the little carving beside her sleeping mat and whispered, "If you can return what's lost, then teach me how to rise again." From that day her routine changed. She began waking earlier than the others, long before dawn, and walked to the river alone. The mist clung low, and the world was silent except for the soft rush of water. There she washed her hands, prayed, and whispered her grief into the current. She didn't ask for love. She didn't ask for her husband back. She only asked for strength. As weeks passed, the women of the village began to notice her transformation. Her back no longer slumped. Her eyes, once hollow, now held quiet determination. She worked faster than anyone, harvesting, trading, and even helping the widows with their crops. Slowly, people began to seek her out for help, then for advice. One morning, a trader from a neighboring village came to sell his goods. He saw Naima negotiating at the market, firm but kind, and was struck by her confidence. "You should come help me manage my trade routes," he suggested. "I'll pay you fairly. You have a head for numbers and people." Naima hesitated. The journey would mean leaving her mother, but something deep inside whispered, "Go." She accepted. The road led her across rivers, hills, and bustling markets where people from far villages gathered. The world was larger than she'd ever known. For the first time she saw wealth not as gold or fine wrappers, but as power, knowledge, and freedom. Under the trader's guidance, Naima learned how to weigh value, how to read men's words before they spoke, how to turn a single basket of yams into 10. Within a year she became indispensable, the one everyone turned to for deals and disputes. Her confidence grew, but she never forgot the river or the wooden figure. She carried it wrapped in a piece of cloth wherever she went. Each evening she would take it out, hold it to her chest, and whisper, "I'm still here." Then one night at a distant market she overheard a familiar name, Olu. Two men were talking under a palm tree. "That fool," one said. "He thought marrying the chief's daughter would make him rich. But she bleeds his pockets dry. They say the chief's trade collapsed after drought. Now even Adana sells her jewels to survive." Naima froze. Her chest tightened, not with longing but with something sharper, disbelief mixed with calm satisfaction. When she returned to her hut that night, she stared at the carving beside her mat. "So, the river truly gives back," she whispered. She did not rejoice at their downfall. Instead, she thought of how far she had come, from the woman who walked barefoot with tears in her eyes to one whose name carried weight in markets. That night, as rain began to fall, Naima stood outside and let it soak her hair and wrapper. The cool drops washed away the last traces of dust and pain. It felt like a baptism, a quiet rebirth. By morning she knew what she must do. She would not run from her past anymore. She would return, not as the broken wife Olu abandoned, but as the woman he could no longer ignore. The sun rose through clouds of silver as she began to pack her things, the carving, her few belongings, and the strength she had gathered from pain. She looked into the mirror-like river one last time and whispered, "Now let him see what he threw away." The spirit of return lay still in her palm, as if smiling. The road to her old village was long and lined with memories. Every tree, every turn whispered of a life Naima once lived. She carried only a small bundle and the carved wooden figure tied to her waist. Her steps were steady, not fast, not hesitant, just deliberate, like a woman walking toward her truth. When she reached the edge of the village, the children stopped playing and stared. No one recognized her at first. Her wrapper was bright, her jewelry modest but refined, her hair wrapped in a deep red scarf that glimmered in the sun. She didn't look like the broken woman who had left years ago. She looked like someone from a story. Word spread quickly. "Naima has returned." Women peeked from their doors. Old friends whispered. And before the hour was over, Olu himself appeared. His once proud shoulders were bent, his fine clothes faded. The fire that used to burn in his eyes was gone, replaced by exhaustion and quiet shame. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy with all the things that had been left unsaid. Finally Olu said, "You came back." Naima nodded. "I came for the river, not for you." Her voice was calm, steady, like the woman she had become. But her words cut sharper than anger. He looked down, struggling to find something to say. "Adana. She left," he murmured. "After my business failed, she found another man. I thought I could rebuild, but—" Naima raised a hand. "You don't owe me your story. I have already heard the ending." Silence. The villagers had gathered quietly around them now, pretending to busy themselves, but every ear strained toward the words between them. Olu took a deep breath. "I wronged you, Naima. I know it now. I thought wealth and beauty would make me whole, but I traded peace for pride." She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt no hatred, no desire for revenge. Only pity. "You traded love for gold," she said softly, "and now you have neither." Then she turned away, walking toward the chief's compound, where the new festival committee was preparing for the harvest celebrations. She had been invited by traders to represent her new region. They sought her counsel on trade routes and market reforms. As she entered the compound, the chief's wife came to greet her. "So you are the famous Naima we've heard of," she said warmly. "They say your wisdom saved many markets from collapse." Naima bowed politely. "It was not wisdom," she replied. "It was hunger. Hunger teaches faster than books." Laughter rippled softly through the women gathered there. They admired her humility and grace. Before long she was at the center of conversation, speaking of unity, of the need for women to trade directly, not always through their husbands. Her voice carried strength and people listened. But even as she spoke, her eyes drifted once toward the crowd, to where Olu stood in the back watching. His face was pale, unreadable. He looked like a man standing at the grave of his own choices. When the gathering ended, he approached her again, hesitantly. "Naima, please, one last word." She turned, her expression soft but distant. "Adana took everything," he said bitterly. "Even my father's land. I have nothing left." Naima's gaze didn't waver. "And yet you stand. That means you still have something, breath, time, and the chance to begin again." "I had less than that and I built a life." He swallowed hard. "You built more than a life," he said quietly. "You built what I destroyed." She said nothing. Instead, she reached into her satchel and brought out the small wooden figure. The spirit of return gleamed faintly in the light. She placed it on a nearby rock. "This was buried in the soil the day I began again," she said. "Now it belongs here, where my pain began. Maybe someone else will find it when their time comes." Olu's voice trembled. "Do you hate me, Naima?" She looked at him for a long time. "No," she said finally. "Hate is too heavy to carry. I only remember." Then she turned away and walked down toward the river. The villagers watched in silence, sensing they had witnessed something sacred, a reckoning without cruelty, a victory without vengeance. At the water's edge, Naima knelt and touched the current. The river murmured softly as if greeting an old friend. For the first time she smiled, not the small, tight smile of survival but one of peace. The sun dipped low, painting her face in gold and crimson. The spirit of return gleamed faintly from its resting place above. The next morning, sunlight poured over the village like a blessing. The river shimmered with light, and Naima rose early to help the women at the market. Word of her return had spread through every corner, not as gossip this time but as wonder. People whispered her name with a mixture of guilt and admiration. Naima, the woman who returned with grace. When she walked through the market square, the air shifted. Men who once ignored her lowered their heads. Women watched in awe, remembering how they had looked away when she was abandoned. She carried herself differently now, not with pride but with a quiet, rooted power. Her wrapper was bright red and gold, her bracelets chiming softly as she walked, her face calm yet unreadable. She bought fruits, herbs, and clay pots, greeting everyone with the same warmth. It was as though she had erased every insult that once clung to her name. But behind her she felt eyes watching. When she turned, she saw a young woman standing near the palm wine stall, dressed in fine silk, her expression sharp. It was Adana. The same woman who had stolen her husband now stood trembling, her wealth fading like the last glow of sunset. Her once perfect hair was tangled, and her gold bangles looked too heavy for her thin wrists. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat the world went still. Adana walked toward her slowly, the crowd parting as if afraid to stand between them. When she finally stopped in front of Naima, she tried to smile but her voice cracked. "You came back, after everything?" Naima's eyes softened. "I came for peace, not for the past." Adana hesitated. "I thought you'd curse me. Everyone says you have power now, that even the traders bow when you speak." Naima shook her head gently. "Power doesn't come from curses. It comes from surviving what was meant to destroy you." The words struck deep. Adana's eyes filled with tears. "He told me I would live like a queen," she whispered. "But every night I wake up feeling hollow. You were the one who made him kind. Without you he became nothing." Naima looked at her long and hard. "We both suffered because of his choices. But what you did, taking part in another woman's fall, that was yours." Adana bowed her head. "I know. I thought taking what you had would make me whole. But it only left me empty." For a long moment neither spoke. Around them, the market hummed softly, life continuing, children laughing, the smell of roasted maize rising through the air. Naima reached into her basket and pulled out a small fruit, ripe, golden, and fragrant. She held it out. "Take it," she said. The world has enough bitterness without us adding more. Adana stared at the fruit, then took it with trembling hands. She tried to speak but her voice failed her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, the first tears the villagers had ever seen from the proud woman. She turned and walked away through the crowd, her figure small, almost fragile. As she left, murmurs spread. Some people said Naima was foolish to show kindness. Others said only queens could forgive like that. But Naima didn't care. She simply turned back to her stall, arranged her goods, and went on selling as if nothing had happened. Later that day an elder approached her. "Child," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You have shamed us with your strength. We judged you once, today you judged us by forgiving." Naima bowed respectfully. "I didn't forgive to shame anyone. I forgave to breathe again." That evening as the sun began to fall, the drums started, the first rhythm of the harvest festival. The chief sent word that Naima would be honored for her work helping women traders across the villages. She was to speak before everyone that night. When she stood before the crowd, the flames from the bonfire flickered across her face. Her voice rose clear and steady. "Pain is not the end of a woman. Sometimes it is only the beginning. We are not made to break, we are made to bend and rise again." The women clapped, ululated, and some even cried. The men stood silent, humbled. From the edge of the firelight, Adana watched, her eyes lowered, and when Naima finished, she too bowed her head in respect. Naima had not just won back her name. She had become something larger, a living lesson. The wife who was betrayed had become the woman everyone now looked to for guidance. As the drums thundered and the people danced, Naima smiled quietly, the firelight glowing on her face. She had finally become what no betrayal could take away, her own kind of queen. Visual tone, vibrant festival lights, glowing fire reflections on skin, colorful garments swirling in dance, tearful faces among the crowd. Emotional tone, forgiveness, power and poetic justice, the triumph of dignity over cruelty. Weeks passed after the festival, and the village had not stopped speaking her name. Naima's story traveled beyond the river, beyond the borders of her homeland. Traders carried it to far-off markets, women sang it in evening gatherings, the woman who forgave and became more than a queen. But Naima did not live like royalty. Her hut was still simple, her hands still worked the soil. Each morning she rose before dawn, tying her wrapper tightly, fetching water from the well like every other woman. Yet wherever she went, people stepped aside. They called her Mama Naima, the voice of grace. Children followed her to the river, listening to her stories of seeds and patience. She taught them that strength wasn't in shouting but in standing firm. When the storm comes, she told them, you do not fight the wind. You bow, and when it passes, you rise taller. One day the chief's wife sent word that Naima was to attend a gathering of women leaders from nearby villages. They wanted her counsel on how to rebuild after a famine had swept through the region. Naima agreed, though her heart carried a quiet hesitation. She had never sought power and she feared what attention could bring. When she arrived at the chief's compound, drums sounded in welcome. Women dressed in beads and silk stood to greet her. The chief himself rose from his seat and bowed his head, not deeply but enough to stir whispers among the onlookers. Naima, he said, your name has carried farther than our messengers. You have fed your people not only with food but with hope. We honor you. Naima bowed in return. It was not I alone, she replied. The earth listens to those who treat it kindly. My hands are only tools of her mercy. The meeting began, but Naima soon realized not everyone welcomed her voice. Some women from wealthier clans looked at her with envy, a farmer's widow being praised more than chief's daughters? One of them, a tall woman named Dahlia, spoke sharply. It is easy to forgive when life favors you. What of those who lose everything and never find it again? Naima met her gaze calmly. Then we must carry them. Strength is not a gift for oneself, it is a burden we share. Her words silenced the gathering. Even Dahlia looked away humbled. The chief's wife smiled. This is why your name carries light, Naima. As the sun sank, Naima walked home through the fields. The golden sky stretched wide above her, and for the first time she allowed herself to breathe deeply. She had lived through pain, betrayal, and loneliness, yet here she stood, not only unbroken but shining in ways she had never dreamed. That evening, Adana appeared at her door. The younger woman's eyes were swollen from tears. He's dying, she whispered. Kweku, he's been ill for weeks. He calls for you. Naima's heart faltered for a moment. The man who had betrayed her, the man who left her with nothing, was calling her name? She stood in silence, torn between anger and compassion. Finally she nodded. I will come. When she entered the compound, Kweku lay weak on a mat, his face thin and pale. The sight stirred something deep within her, not love, not hatred, but a strange tenderness born from closure. His eyes opened slowly, and when they found her, tears gathered. Naima, he rasped, I thought power would make me whole. But everything I touched turned to ash. She knelt beside him, the soft sound of her bracelets filling the silence. Power built on betrayal never lasts, she said quietly. He tried to reach for her hand. I wronged you more than words can mend. Naima held his hand gently, not as a wife but as a human offering mercy. I already forgave you, Kweku. Long before you asked. His breath came slow and shallow. They said, you became a queen. Naima smiled faintly. A queen is only a servant who learned to stand. A tear rolled down his cheek. You are everything I thought I wanted, and more than I deserve. As night deepened, he closed his eyes for the last time. Adana cried softly beside him, her grief raw and unguarded. Naima stayed until the first light of dawn, then stood and walked out to the river, where mist floated above the water. She whispered, the chapter ends but the story remains. Her reflection rippled in the current, older, wiser, radiant. In that moment she realized she no longer carried pain. She had outgrown it. The villagers soon learned of Kweku's death. Many expected Naima to retreat in mourning, but instead she went on tending her gardens, laughing with children and teaching others how to rise from loss. From that day people no longer called her Naima the widow. They called her Naima the queen without a crown. Seasons changed and time began to wrap the village in new stories, but none louder, none brighter than that of Naima. The woman who had once been cast aside now carried the weight of hope for others. Her garden by the river had grown into a field of plenty, a place where women came not just to plant seeds, but to plant new beginnings. Every dawn, smoke rose gently from her small hut. The sound of laughter followed, not hers alone, but that of the young women she had begun to teach. Widows, orphans and abandoned wives came to her, broken and unsure, and Naima took them in. She gave them tools, shared her knowledge and taught them to trade. You cannot eat pity, she would say. You must feed yourself with your own hands. Soon, a quiet revolution began to ripple through the land. Women from neighboring villages carried baskets of vegetables to the markets, built stalls and spoke with confidence. Men who once mocked them now traded with them. The chief's council started sending envoys to seek Naima's advice, a thing unheard of before. But Naima remained humble. I am not a queen, she said once during a gathering. I am a mother of those who rise. Her words spread like wind through the region. Songs were made of her, soft songs sung by children while fetching water, and louder ones chanted by women during harvest. One went. She was buried in silence. But her voice grew roots. She was cast away. But her spirit returned crowned. The more her name grew, the more people sought her. One day a messenger arrived from the king's court, dusty, tired, and reverent. He bowed before her. Our queen has heard of the woman by the river who turns sorrow into gold. She invites you to the palace. The kingdom needs your wisdom. The news spread through the village like fire through dry grass. Everyone gathered outside her home, urging her to go. But Naima only smiled. The river is my throne, she said softly. If the queen wishes to learn, she may come to the river. Weeks later, to everyone's astonishment, the royal entourage arrived, drums, banners, and all. The queen herself stepped down from her carriage, dressed in royal blue silk. She was young, elegant, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much grief. Are you Naima? She asked, her voice trembling with humility. Naima bowed slightly. I am she. Welcome to my garden. The queen looked around, the river gleaming under the sun, women working together, children laughing. I have heard of your strength, she said. But I came not to praise you, I came to learn. Naima smiled gently. Then you have already begun. They sat together by the river's edge, speaking as women, not as ruler and subject. The queen confessed how, even in the palace, her heart felt small, trapped by expectations and loneliness. Naima listened quietly, then said, The palace is only a larger cage if you do not know your worth. You must rule yourself before you rule others. Those words stayed with the queen forever. When she returned home, she implemented changes: fairer trade for women, better harvest rights, protection for widows. And when the king asked who had inspired her, she said simply, a woman by the river, a queen without a crown. That title spread beyond the borders of their land. Travelers and poets began to speak her story in marketplaces, around fires, across distant roads. Some swore she had been blessed by the ancestors. Others said she was the spirit of the earth herself. But Naima never claimed greatness. She lived simply, always returning to her garden, her feet in the cool mud, her eyes on the horizon. To those who visited, she offered food, stories, and peace. One evening, as the sun set in waves of orange and red, Adana came to her once more. This time she wasn't weeping. She knelt before Naima, not out of guilt but gratitude. "You saved me," she said. "Not with words, but with how you lived." Naima helped her up and smiled. "Then live now, Adana. Be the woman you once feared to become." The two women embraced, and the crowd that watched felt the shift, the end of rivalry, the beginning of legacy. As the drums began again that night, Naima stood near the fire, her silhouette glowing like flame. The people danced and sang her name, not as a myth but as a mirror of what they could be. The moon hung full and wide above the river the night Naima could not sleep. The drums had stopped hours ago, yet her heart beat in their rhythm. She stood outside her hut, watching the silver light wash over the rippling water. Her name had become a legend, her work had changed lives. But peace, she realized, comes with a whisper of danger. Word of her deeds had reached not just the queen, but the neighboring kingdom of Itoro, a land ruled by a proud and cunning ruler named King Alyadare. He was a man who saw power not in kindness but in control. When his advisors spoke of the woman by the river, who had more influence than chiefs, more followers than warriors, his pride turned to fear. "A woman?" he spat, pacing his grand hall. "A farmer's widow commands more respect than kings? This cannot stand. She will come to my court and kneel, or she will vanish." So he sent soldiers under the guise of an invitation. They arrived at Naima's village one morning with golden cloths and sharp smiles. Their leader bowed stiffly. "The great King Alyadare summons you," he declared. "He wishes to honor your wisdom." Naima saw through their pretense immediately, but she smiled. "The king wishes to honor me? Then let me bring him a gift, truth." Despite her followers' protests, Naima agreed to go. "Fear only feeds evil," she said. "I will not let it eat what we've built." The journey to Itoro was long, the roads dry and dusty. Villagers along the way recognized her and knelt as she passed. Some offered fruits, some just prayers. The soldiers watched uneasily, realizing the depth of her reach. By the time they reached the palace, even they looked at her with quiet respect. King Alyadare's court was lavish, gold walls, crimson carpets, jeweled goblets. But its beauty was hollow. Naima could feel the tension hanging in the air. When she entered, the king sat high upon his throne, his robe lined with leopard skin, his fingers heavy with rings. His eyes studied her with a mix of curiosity and contempt. "So this is the woman the earth itself seems to serve," he said mockingly. "They call you a queen without a crown." Naima bowed slightly. "A crown is heavy, my king. I carry peace instead." Her calm tone unsettled him. "Peace?" he sneered. "Peace makes people lazy. I rule with fear because fear brings order." Naima looked him in the eye, not defiant but steady. "Fear builds walls, not kingdoms. And walls, no matter how tall, crumble when hearts inside them are empty." The court murmured. Some nobles nodded subtly, others glared. The king's jaw tightened. "You speak boldly, woman. Do you think your river protects you here?" Naima smiled faintly. "The river flows everywhere, my king, even beneath your walls." For a long moment, silence filled the hall. Then unexpectedly the queen of Itoro, a quiet woman with gentle eyes, rose from beside the throne. She approached Naima slowly, her gaze filled with something like recognition. "I have heard your name," the queen said. "I have heard how you lift the broken and teach them to stand. Tell me, what should a queen do when her husband rules through fear?" Gasps rippled through the court. King Alyadare's face turned dark. "You dare question me?" he thundered. But Naima stepped forward, shielding the queen with her calm. "A queen," she said softly, "must rule where fear cannot reach, in the hearts of her people." The moment felt suspended in eternity. Then suddenly a sound rose from outside, chanting, rhythmic and deep. The guards rushed to the balcony. Below, hundreds of villagers had gathered, holding torches, singing Naima's name. "She speaks for us," they shouted. "The woman of the river." Alyadare turned pale. His own people were rising, not with weapons but with belief. The king's advisors whispered frantically. One said, "If you harm her, there will be revolt." Another murmured, "If you honor her, your name will rise again." Alyadare clenched his fists, torn between pride and survival. Finally he stood and raised his staff. "Enough," he roared. Then after a long pause he turned to Naima. "If the people love you so much," he said coldly, "then show them how to lead. I name you royal counselor, though mark this, woman, one mistake and I will end what you've begun." Naima bowed her head, unafraid. "A leader is only as strong as her truth. I will speak mine even if it burns." That night the queen visited Naima in her chamber. She knelt beside her and whispered, "You have done in one day what I could not do in years. You've made him listen." Naima took her hands gently. "Then let us make him see. Change begins not with the throne, but with the soul sitting upon it." As dawn painted the palace in gold, Naima stood at the window, the river of Etoro gleaming far below. She had come as a humble woman, but fate, it seemed, was preparing her for something far greater. The palace of Etoro had never known such quiet. Servants whispered in corners, guards watched the gates more closely, and ministers carried their scrolls with trembling hands. Since Naima's arrival, the rhythm of power had shifted. The king no longer barked commands without glancing first toward her. The queen, once silent, had begun to speak her mind in meetings. The people outside the walls chanted her name in the markets, in the fields, even in the songs children hummed. But power, even when born from goodness, awakens envy. Chief Adewale, the king's oldest advisor, had watched everything unfold with a growing bitterness. For years he had controlled the royal ear with flattery and deceit. Now, a woman from the river spoke and the king listened, and Adewale saw his influence slipping through his fingers. "She has bewitched him," he hissed to the other council members. "Her tongue drips honey but it hides venom. If we don't act, she will wear the crown herself." Whispers of conspiracy began to swirl through the marble halls. And Naima, though wise, could sense the air thickening with something dark. One morning, while she was walking through the royal gardens, Naima found the queen sitting beneath a jacaranda tree. Purple blossoms had fallen all around her, covering her feet like a soft carpet. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days," the queen said quietly. "Your words trouble him. He dreams of losing everything." Naima sat beside her. "He fears peace," she murmured. "Men who rule with fear often mistake peace for weakness. But fear cannot last forever, it always turns against the one who wields it." The queen's eyes glistened. "Do you ever tire, Naima? Always being strong?" Naima smiled faintly. "Strength is not a gift. It is a price we pay for surviving." That night, Adewale's plan took shape. He summoned the king privately. "My king," he said in a voice heavy with false concern, "the people no longer sing your name, they sing hers. The queen follows her counsel. Your guards whisper about her blessings. She means to take your throne." King Alyadare's eyes darkened. "You lie." "Would I?" Adewale held up a piece of parchment, forged by his own hand, that seemed to bear Naima's writing. It was a letter addressed to the rulers of neighboring kingdoms, inviting them to unite under her leadership for a new dawn. The king snatched the paper. "She dares? She waits for the right moment," Adewale said, bowing low. "But I will bring you proof if you allow me." Alyadare nodded slowly. "Bring me proof, and if it is true, she will die before the sun sets." The next morning, Naima stood before the council, unaware of the storm building against her. She was presenting her plan for opening the palace gardens to the public. A symbol of unity, she said, between ruler and ruled. But halfway through her speech, guards burst into the chamber. "By royal decree," they shouted. "Naima of the river, you are accused of treason against the throne." The room gasped. The queen stood pale and trembling. "This is madness," she cried. Naima did not resist as the guards seized her arms. Her gaze moved to the king, his face twisted with fury but his eyes flickered with doubt. "Your Majesty," she said calmly, "the truth cannot be buried, it grows roots." The king slammed his staff. "Enough. Take her to the courtyard. Let the people see what becomes of those who betray their king." They dragged her through the palace gates, where hundreds of villagers had already gathered. Word had spread like fire. Mothers clutched their children, men stood with clenched fists. The guards forced Naima to kneel on the dry earth. Adewale stood nearby, smiling faintly. "Any last words?" the king demanded, stepping forward. Naima looked up, her voice steady. "You think I sought your throne, Alyadare. But I only sought your peace. And when this truth rises, even your crown will bow to it." A hush fell. The queen stepped forward suddenly, tears streaking her cheeks. "My husband, look at her. That is not a traitor's face. You know her heart, and you know Adewale's lies. But the king hesitated too long. A villager in the crowd shouted, "Let her go!" Then another cried, "She saved our children." Within seconds the chant rose like thunder, "Naima! Naima! Naima!" The guards faltered. Adewale's smile vanished. "My king, order them." But Alyadare could not speak. The people surged forward, unarmed yet unstoppable. The guards dropped their spears. The queen ran to Naima's side and untied her hands. The crowd's roar echoed through the valley as Naima rose slowly, her posture regal, her eyes full of quiet fire. By sunset, Adewale had fled, and the king sat alone in his empty throne room, trembling. He had seen something that no crown could command, a woman's truth stronger than his rule. When the council reconvened days later, Alyadare made his decree, "From this day the voice of the people shall guide the throne. And Naima of the river shall stand beside the queen, as leader of the council." The queen placed a golden band upon Naima's wrist. "You wear no crown," she said, "but you have the heart of one." Naima bowed. "Then let this be our kingdom, one led by truth not by fear." Months passed and the kingdom of Etoro was never the same again. The gardens Naima had once tended were now open to all. Children played where guards once stood, farmers exchanged seeds beneath flowering trees, and the air felt lighter, freer. Her name no longer carried the weight of scandal or whispers, it carried reverence. But Naima never sought the throne that others once accused her of coveting. She chose instead to guide from behind, to rebuild what pride and fear had broken. Each dawn, she walked through the palace courtyard with her hands brushing the leaves of the same fig trees that had once shaded her trial ground. She remembered that day often, the faces in the crowd, the queen's tears, the king's trembling silence, and she thanked the gods not for her survival but for the lesson. When the king finally came to her chambers one morning, his voice was quieter than the wind. "Naima," he said, "you saved my throne, and my soul. You could rule beside me if you wish. The people would accept you." Naima looked at him with calm eyes. "I do not want your throne, Alyadare. A crown is heavy not because of gold but because of guilt. Let it rest on your head, and let me serve where I am strongest, among the people." The king nodded, a shadow of shame flickering in his eyes. "I was a fool to believe lies. My power blinded me." She smiled faintly. "Then open your eyes wider now. Lead differently. Let truth sit beside you, not pride." From that day on, the kingdom entered what the elders later called the season of light. The palace no longer loomed above the people, it opened its gates to them. Festivals were held to honor those who toiled in the fields, not just those who wore silk. The queen worked beside Naima to create schools where girls could learn to read, and the men who once sneered at women's voices found themselves listening, learning, and changing. And Naima, she became more than a counselor. She became a living legend. Years passed and her name spread far beyond Etoro's borders. Travelers spoke of a woman whose wisdom could calm storms, whose words could humble kings. Children in distant villages were named Naima, and when they asked why, their mothers said, "Because she taught us that the river's calm is not weakness, it is power waiting to rise." Yet Naima never let praise take root in her heart. She still rose before dawn, still visited the river that had carried her sorrow years ago, still knelt by its edge and whispered her morning prayer. "Let my heart stay soft even when the world is not." One evening as the sun sank low, the queen came to find her sitting by that same river. "You've given everything to this kingdom," she said softly. "Don't you ever wish you had kept something for yourself?" Naima smiled. "I have. I kept my peace, and that is more than gold." The queen knelt beside her. "The people call you the queen without a crown." Naima laughed, the sound gentle and warm. "Then let them keep calling. A true queen does not need a throne to rule, she only needs a heart that listens." When Naima grew old, her hair turning silver like moonlight, the people of Etoro gathered once more beneath the great baobab tree. It was the same place where her story had begun, where betrayal, truth, and courage had all collided. That day the queen, now gray-haired herself, stood before the crowd and spoke, "We gather not to mourn but to remember. Once a woman rose from the river, carrying her pain as a crown. She taught us that no one can steal what the spirit protects." They buried Naima by the riverbank, the same place where she had once been cast aside. The soil was rich with the seeds of her legacy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a group of young girls placed flowers upon her grave and began to sing the song that had outlived the years. She was the woman who was betrayed. But her heart did not decay. They buried her in the dust of lies. Yet she rose to rule the skies. The wind carried their voices across the water, through the fields she once tended, into the palace she once reformed. And in the fading light, as dusk wrapped the kingdom in gold, it was said that a single white heron rose from the river and flew toward the horizon, slow, steady, graceful. The people took it as a sign. Naeema's spirit had returned to the river, free and eternal.